Since you aren't actual blood, we made sure to legally exclude you from the executive trust," my adoptive mother broadcasted over the microphone at her corporate gala. The ballroom chuckled, but I just walked to the podium, dropped a certified document into her expensive Merlot, and watched her face drain as she fished it out. I was the charity case my entire life. They took me in at 7 after my biological mother ended up in federal prison for writing bad checks to the wrong people. For a brief window, I was a useful prop in the Calloway household. I got a decent bed with an expensive duvet and an adoptive mother, Adele, who paraded my salvation around her Chicago book club like a trophy. She liked things that made her look benevolent, without requiring actual warmth. But around my 9th birthday, the fragile ecosystem of our house shifted permanently. The endless rounds of if finally took. Adele had her biological daughter, Ren, and the illusion of my place in the family shattered overnight. I morphed from a daughter into an inconvenient roommate. The changes were small at first, then aggressively undeniable. I was left out of the matching Christmas pajamas, handed a generic red flannel set while Adele, her husband, and Ren wore custom monogrammed silk. My graduation photos never made the hallway gallery on the 2nd floor. They stayed in a cheap frame on my desk. I figured out early on that my role was to be invisible, express endless gratitude for the roof over my head, and never, ever point out the double standards. I kept my mouth shut. I observed, and I took notes on exactly how Adele operated. My great-uncle Theodore was the only crack in their polished marble countertop facade. He was Adele's uncle, the original founder of Drent Logistics, the freight firm she now ran with an iron fist and terrible margins. Theodore despised how she did business. He was a quiet, sharp-eyed man who wore simple cardigans and noticed everything. He noticed the heavy sighs Adele directed at me. He noticed the way I shrank into the upholstery during family photos, so I wouldn't take up too much space. He never treated my adoption like a tax write-off or a burden. He treated me like a person. He was the only one who asked about my calculus grades or my plans to move to the West Coast. 4 months before a series of strokes took him, he asked me to meet him at a dingy, 24-hour diner off the interstate, far away from Adele's usual haunts. He smelled like peppermints and old wool. He ordered black coffee, barely touched it, and slid a thick manila folder across the sticky Formica table. "They are going to bleed that company dry and leave you with nothing," he said, his voice raspy but entirely steady. "So I'm cutting the strings." Inside the folder was a stack of finalized patent transfers and a mountain of legal jargon I barely understood at the time. He explained it to me, slowly and methodically. The proprietary routing algorithm that served as the backbone of the entire Drent Logistics empire, the software Adele constantly claimed in Forbes interviews as her own sweeping innovation, didn't belong to the corporate entity. Theodore had funded its development privately years ago. It belonged to him. And as of that morning at 9:15 a.m., it had been irrevocably transferred into a blind trust controlled entirely by me. Adele had no idea. She thought she owned the architecture of her own success. In reality, she was building her freight empire on rented ground, paying massive quarterly licensing fees to a phantom LLC that I now secretly owned. Theodore looked me dead in the eye, his hand trembling slightly against the ceramic mug. "Let them hang themselves with their arrogance. Don't say a word until they try to cut you out." I kept that promise. After the funeral, I moved to Seattle. I got a quiet job in data analytics. I let my relationship with the Callaways fade into generic holiday texts and missed phone calls. Life stayed peaceful, predictable, and safe until the silver-embossed summons to the company's 25th anniversary gala arrived in my mailbox. It was printed on heavy cardstock, the kind that costs a ridiculous amount of money just to prove you have it. I knew exactly what it was: a photo op. Adele needed to show off her perfectly curated, diverse family to the board of directors before the upcoming quarterly earnings call. I stared at the invitation on my kitchen counter for 3 days. Then I RSVP'd yes, bought a dark emerald dress that cost more than my first car, and booked a flight to Chicago. The hotel ballroom was a sea of black tuxedos, sequined gowns, and the oppressive hum of corporate networking. I stood near the back during cocktail hour, nursing a club soda and watching Adele work the room. She was in her element, shaking hands, laughing too loudly, accepting congratulations for a quarter century of a company she had inherited and squeezed for every dime. Halfway through the hour, Ren cornered me by the massive swan ice sculpture. She had the same smug, practiced smirk her mother wore when dealing with contractors. "I'm surprised you actually flew out for this," Ren said, looking me up and down. "Mom's announcing the new board of directors tonight. Don't feel bad when your name isn't on the slides." She leaned in, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's just business. You know how it is." I gave her a polite, flat nod. Reacting to their cruelty only ever fueled it. "I know exactly how it is, Ren." When Adele took the stage, the crystal chandeliers dimmed on cue. The room fell silent, the spotlight hitting her perfectly styled hair and the expensive cut of her dress. She spent 10 minutes thanking the investors, praising her own visionary leadership, and waxing poetic about the future of logistics. Then she called Ren up to the stage, officially naming her the future CEO in waiting. The applause was deafening. Adele held up a hand to quiet the room. Her eyes scanned the crowd and locked onto me, standing near the heavy oak double doors at the back. She gripped the microphone, leaning into it to deliver the ultimate punchline to 300 wealthy, influential guests. "And while we love our little adopted rescue project standing in the back, she's not actual blood," Adele laughed, the sound sharp and metallic through the speakers. "So when we restructured the executive trust this morning, we made sure to legally exclude her. Business is business, right?" The ballroom erupted into polite, uncomfortable laughter. A few heads turned in my direction, eyes full of pity or amusement. I didn't flush. I didn't cry. I unclasped my velvet clutch, pulled out a thick folded piece of paper, and and walked straight down the long center aisle. I ignored the confused whispers of the executives I passed. The walk felt like it took an hour, my heels clicking faintly against the polished hardwood between the carpet runners. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the stage. Adele looked down at me, still grinning, holding a glass of expensive Merlot in her left hand. She thought I was going to beg. She thought I was going to make a scene that would only prove her right about my instability. I reached up and dropped the folded paper directly into her wine glass. The laughter died instantly. The silence in the room became absolute, a suffocating vacuum. Adele glared at me, her smile twisting into genuine fury. She plunged her manicured fingers into the dark liquid, splashing red drops onto her white dress, and fished out the soaking document. She slammed the dripping pages onto the clear acrylic podium and smoothed them out. I watched her eyes dart across the ruined ink. It took her a few seconds to process the heavy legal header, the official notice of immediate revocation, the algorithm patent, the transfer logs dating back years, the formal, irrevocable termination of the licensing agreement that legally barred Callaway Drent from using the software, effective at midnight. At the bottom of the page, bleeding purple where the wine had hit the ink, was the sole proprietor's signature. Mine. She looked up at me, her jaw literally unhinged, the color draining from her face so fast she looked ill. "Happy anniversary," I said, my voice steady enough to carry to the first 3 rows. "You have 3 hours to shut down my servers." Her phone buzzed on the podium. It vibrated violently against the acrylic. Then Ren's phone went off in her clutch. Then, one by one, a cascading wave of sound swept through the ballroom. Every phone in the room lit up with the same emergency alert, a harsh, uniform chime that cut through the silence like a siren. And not one of them was about me. Adele lunged for her phone, smearing wine across the screen to unlock it. I watched her eyes widen in a completely different kind of terror. The arrogance was gone. Pure panic replaced it. I didn't have to guess what it was. A man in the front row, a senior VP of operations, read his screen out loud, his voice cracking. The Teamsters, they just walked. All of them. The independent contractors filed a class action for wage theft in federal court 10 minutes ago, and the drivers are abandoning the rigs. The ballroom dissolved into chaos. Executives started shouting. Investors were scrambling for the exits, dialing their brokers. The company wasn't just losing its routing algorithm at midnight. It was losing its entire physical fleet right now. I turned to walk away. I was done. I had delivered Theodore's message, and the universe had apparently decided to deliver its own at the exact same moment. But before I could take 3 steps down the aisle, a hand clamped down on my wrist like a vice. It was Adele. She had jumped off the low stage, her eyes wide, wild, and entirely cornered. "You did this," she hissed, her fingers digging into my skin. "You knew about the drivers. You timed this to destroy me. I don't care about your drivers, Adele. Let go of me. I am not going to let a little ungrateful stray ruin my company." She spat, her voice shaking with a terrifying, venomous calm. "You think that piece of paper means anything? I have 3 corporate firms on retainer. I will drag Theodore's estate into probate court by Monday morning. I will publicly claim he was suffering from dementia. I'll have a judge freeze your little LLC, your bank accounts, and every asset you think you own before you even get back to Seattle." Ren appeared behind her mother, her face pale, holding her phone. "Mom, the stock is already tanking in after-hours trading. The journalists are outside the hotel." Adele ignored her, her grip on my wrist tightening. "You aren't leaving Chicago. You're going to stay right here, and you are going to sign that patent back over to the trust, or I will tie you up in litigation until you can't afford rent. You don't know what a real war looks like." I looked down at her hand. Her knuckles were white, the sharp edge of her platinum wedding band digging a crescent moon into my forearm. I didn't try to pull away. I didn't flinch. I just stared at her fingers, then up at her face, watching the sweat bead along her hairline, ruining her perfect blowout. "Take your hand off me, Adele," I said, my voice completely flat, "or the assault charge will be the cherry on top of your SEC violations." She hesitated. For a split second, I saw the exact moment the sheer scale of her powerlessness washed over her. Her grip loosened just enough for me to pull my arm back. I smoothed the velvet of my clutch. "You think Theodore left this to chance?" I asked, keeping my voice low enough that Ren had to lean in to hear me. "You think we used your in-house counsel? He hired Sullivan Cahill. He had an independent psychiatric evaluation done by 2 different board-certified neurologists the morning he signed the transfer. On video. He was sharper than you ever were, and he made sure the paper trail was bulletproof. By all means, drag it into probate. See what happens when Discovery opens up your books and the judge sees exactly how you've been misclassifying your drivers for the last 6 years." Adele's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The threat of discovery was the one thing she feared more than losing money. Her books were a house of cards built on tax loopholes and exploited labor. "Mom," Ren tugged at Adele's sleeve. Her voice was thin and reedy, all the smugness completely evaporated. "Mom, the board is leaving. We have to talk to the board." I didn't wait for Adele's response. I turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors. The lobby outside the ballroom was a disaster zone of frantic wealth. Men in tuxedos were pacing the patterned carpets, yelling into their phones. A group of older board members were huddled near the coat check, aggressively questioning the chief financial officer, a man named Holt Wyndham, who looked like he was about to vomit into a decorative planter. I slipped past them, anonymous in my emerald dress, just another guest leaving early. I took the elevator up to the 14th floor. The silence inside the wood-paneled cab was deafening after the chaos downstairs. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a delayed biological response to the confrontation. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the brass railing to steady them. I wasn't an action hero. I was a 26-year-old data analyst who had just set off a financial nuclear bomb in the middle of a family that had spent 15 years making me feel like garbage. It felt incredible, and it felt terrifying. I got to my room, locked the deadbolt, and kicked off my heels. I went straight to the mini fridge, cracked open a ridiculously overpriced bottle of sparkling water, and drank half of it in one go. My phone buzzed. Not the emergency alert, but a standard text notification. I pulled it out. It was an email from my personal bank in Seattle. Subject: urgent account status update. I opened it. The text was boilerplate, dry and robotic. Please be advised that a temporary freeze has been placed on your accounts pursuant to an emergency ex parte injunction filed in Cook County Circuit Court. Please contact our legal department for further instructions. I stared at the screen. My stomach dropped. Adele hadn't been bluffing about the lawyers. She must have had her crisis team on standby the second the servers started failing. They didn't have a case to win, but they didn't need to win today. They just needed to bleed me. By filing a temporary injunction claiming corporate espionage or fraud, they had managed to freeze my assets pending a hearing. I opened my banking app. It spun for a second, then loaded. Available balance, $0.00. I had $400 in cash in my apartment back in Seattle, and my return flight was booked for tomorrow morning. But my rent was due in 4 days. The server maintenance fees for the blind trust were due on the 1st. I had a good job, but I lived in an expensive city, and I didn't have the kind of liquid capital required to fight a multi-million-dollar logistics firm in a war of attrition. Theodore had given me the weapon, but he hadn't left me a war chest to maintain it. He assumed the leverage of the algorithm would be enough to make them fold instantly. He underestimated Adele's sheer, spiteful vindictiveness. I sat down on the edge of the hotel bed, the mattress sinking under my weight. The adrenaline was completely gone now, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. I needed a lawyer in Chicago. I needed to unfreeze my accounts, and I had absolutely no way to pay a retainer. A soft, rapid knock at my door pulled me out of my spiral. I froze. I hadn't ordered room service. The knock came again, sharper this time. "Who is it?" I called out, not moving from the bed. "It's Ren." Her voice was muffled through the heavy wood. "Please, just open the door. I'm alone." I considered ignoring her. I considered calling hotel security. But the reality of my frozen bank accounts was glaring at me from my phone screen. If Ren was here, it meant the Callaway United front was already cracking. Information was the only currency I had left. I walked over, checked the peephole to confirm she was actually alone, and undid the deadbolt. Ren pushed her way in the second the door cracked open, looking over her shoulder down the empty hallway before shutting it behind her. She looked awful. The confident, golden child aura she had projected by the ice sculpture 2 hours ago was gone. Her mascara was slightly smudged, and she was clutching her designer purse like a flotation device. "What do you want, Ren? Did Adele send you to negotiate?" "Mom doesn't know I'm here," she said, her breathing shallow. She paced toward the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline, then spun back to face me. "She's locked in the executive suite with Holt and 3 lawyers. They're drafting a press release to say the system outage is due to a routine migration error, but the board isn't buying it. The stock is down 12% in after hours. That sounds like a CEO problem. Congratulations on the promotion." Ren flinched. She walked over to the armchair and sank into it, burying her face in her hands. "You don't understand. I didn't just inherit the title tonight. I co-signed the bridge loans for the new automated warehouses in Phoenix and Dallas last month. Mom told me it was a formality to get my name on the executive tier. I leveraged my own personal trust. I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. I felt a flicker of surprise. Adele had actually used her own biological daughter as financial collateral. It was ruthlessly efficient and entirely on brand. If the company defaults on those loans because the fleet is paralyzed and the routing algorithm is gone, the bank takes everything I own," Ren said, looking up at me, her eyes wide and panicked. "My house, my portfolio, everything. Mom's assets are protected under an LLC shield she set up 3 years ago. Mine aren't. I'm personally liable for $40 million. I let out a slow, quiet breath, "And you signed the papers without having your own lawyer read them. She's my mother. She said it was just a stepping stone to the board." Ren's voice cracked. She stood up, taking a step toward me. "Look, I know we were awful to you. I know Mom treated you like a stray dog. I know I went along with it. I'm sorry. I am genuinely, desperately sorry. But you have to turn the servers back on. Just for a week. Just long enough for me to restructure the debt and get my name off those loans. I can't do that, Ren. The termination of the licensing agreement is final. If I turn them back on, I invalidate the revocation and Adele will drag me into court for breach of contract, claiming I reauthorized the use. I'd lose all my leverage." "She already froze your accounts, didn't she?" Ren asked. I kept my face perfectly still, but Ren saw it. She gave a bitter, humorless laugh. "I was in the room when she ordered Sullivan Cahill to file the injunction," Ren said. "She knows she can't win the patent dispute. Her entire strategy is to starve you out. She knows you don't have the cash on hand to fight a protracted legal battle across state lines. She's going to keep your money locked up until you miss your rent, lose your job, and come begging to settle for a fraction of what the software is worth. She doesn't know anything about my life in Seattle. She hired a private investigator a week after you RSVP'd to the gala," Ren countered, dropping a bombshell so casually it made my teeth ache. "She knows exactly how much you make. She knows you rent a 1-bedroom in Capitol Hill. She knows you don't have family out there to lean on. She's going to crush you. And she's perfectly fine letting me go bankrupt as collateral damage as long as she maintains control of the board." Ren reached into her purse and pulled out a thick, unmarked white envelope. She walked over to the bed and tossed it onto the mattress. It landed with a heavy thud. "There's $20,000 in cash in there," Ren said. "It's from my emergency safe. Untraceable. It'll pay your rent, your server fees, and get you a decent retainer for a defense lawyer here in Chicago." I stared at the envelope. "Why would you give me this?" "Because I want to buy your algorithm," Ren said, her voice dropping to a dead serious whisper. "Not Not for the company, for me. Privately, I looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time in years. Underneath the spoiled golden child exterior, she had inherited her mother's ruthless survival instincts. I don't understand, I said. If mom goes down, the board will oust her, Ren explained, pacing the small space between the bed and the desk. But the company still needs that software to survive. The infrastructure is built around it. If I hold the patent, I hold the company. I can force the board to make me the actual CEO, not just mom's puppet. I can restructure the debt, save my own assets, and push her out completely. You want to overthrow your own mother. She used me as a human shield for $40 million in corporate debt, Ren snapped, her eyes flashing with a cold, hard anger that looked terrifyingly familiar. She doesn't get to be my mother anymore. She's a liability. Ren pointed to the envelope on the bed. Take the cash. Hire a lawyer tomorrow morning. Fight the injunction. And when you're ready, we draft a quiet transfer of the LLC to me. I'll pay you $5 million over 3 years. You get your revenge on mom, you get a massive payout, and you get to walk away clean. I looked at the envelope. $20,000. It would solve my immediate terrifying problem. It would unfreeze my life. It was a lifeline thrown by the very person who had spent her entire life making sure I drowned. But if I sold it to Ren, I wasn't destroying the toxic empire Theodore wanted dismantled. I was just handing the crown to a younger, potentially more dangerous version of Adele. I need time to think, I said. You don't have time, Ren replied. Mom's lawyers are filing a motion for an emergency discovery hearing on Monday. They are going to demand access to your servers to preserve evidence. If they get in, they'll copy the source code, change 3 lines of the architecture, and claim it's a new, distinct algorithm. You'll lose the patent completely. My blood ran cold. That wasn't just a legal maneuver, that was a technical execution. If they copied the code, the trust was worthless. I'll call you tomorrow, I said, my voice tight. Ren looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Don't underestimate her. She built this company by stepping on people's throats. Yours won't even slow her down. She turned and walked out, the heavy hotel door clicking shut behind her. I stood in the silence of the room, the hum of the air conditioner suddenly loud. I looked at my phone. 0 balance. I looked at the bed. $20,000 in cold, hard cash. I walked over, picked up the envelope, and opened it. It was packed tight with $100 bills. I had thought I was the one setting the trap tonight. I had thought I was the one holding all the cards. I pulled my laptop out of my bag, set it on the desk, and booted it up. I needed to check the server logs. I needed to see if Adele's IT department was already trying to brute force their way into the system before the Monday hearing. The screen flared to life. I bypassed the standard login, opening the encrypted terminal I used to monitor the blind trust's mainframes. A string of green text scrolled rapidly down the black screen. My breath caught in my throat. There were hundreds of failed login attempts. They weren't coming from Adele's corporate headquarters in Chicago. The IP addresses were pinging from a remote server farm in Nevada. Someone wasn't just trying to copy the code. They were actively trying to overwrite the administrative privileges and lock me out of my own system. And they were getting dangerously close to bypassing the first firewall. I didn't try to out-type them. I didn't start frantically mashing keys to rewrite the security protocols. I'm a data analyst, not a cybersecurity hacker from a movie. I just reached out, grabbed the power cord to the router the hotel provided, and yanked it out of the wall. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the 24-hour enterprise support line for the Nevada hosting company. The hold music played for 3 agonizing minutes before a guy named Soren picked up. He sounded like he was on his 3rd energy drink of the night. I need you to pull the physical plug on rack 402, I told him, reading my account number off the screen. Right now. Disconnect it from the external network. Soren paused, the clacking of his keyboard stopping. Ma'am, if I air gap that server, it drops all active connections. Everything. You won't be able to access the admin portal remotely either. It essentially bricks your management access until we re-establish the handshake, which takes 24 hours and secondary authorization in person. Do it, I said. Are you sure? It's going to trigger a total blackout on any appy calls. I'm positive. Kill it. Okay. Executing hard disconnect. I heard a few heavy clicks over the line. Done. Rack 402 is dark. I thanked him, hung up, and exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding since I walked into the ballroom. Adele's IT guys were locked out. They couldn't steal the code now. But Soren was right. I was locked out too. The weapon was secure, but it was currently useless to everyone, including me. I looked back at the bed. The thick white envelope Ren had tossed there looked surreal under the cheap yellow glow of the hotel lamp. $20,000. I walked over, picked up a stack of the crisp $100 bills, and just held them. I had never seen that much physical cash in my life. It smelled like ink and old paper. Ren wanted me to believe this was an olive branch, a mutually beneficial transaction, but it was just a different kind of trap. If I took her money and signed the trust over to her, she'd own the company. Yes, but she'd also own me. She'd have proof I accepted undocumented cash during an active corporate legal dispute. It was exactly the kind of leverage Adele would use, which meant it was exactly what Ren would use. They were the same person, just 20 years apart. I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair by the window, watching the traffic on Michigan Avenue thin out and then slowly build back up as the sun rose over the lake. At 7:00 a.m., I used my phone's cellular data to search for corporate defense attorneys in Chicago who didn't have existing ties to Drent Logistics. By 9:30 a.m., I was sitting in a cramped, overly warm office 3 blocks from the courthouse, across from a woman named Cora Fairfax. She looked to be in her late 50s, wore wire-rimmed glasses, and had a stack of manila folders on her desk that looked dangerously close to toppling over. She didn't offer me coffee. She just asked to see the paperwork. I handed her the injunction Adele's lawyers had filed, the notice from my bank, bank, and the original trust documents Theodore had given me. Cora put on her glasses and read through the injunction in silence. The only sound in the room was the ticking of a cheap wall clock and the hum of a space heater near her feet. Well, Cora said finally, tossing the papers onto her desk. Your adoptive mother's legal team is expensive. I'll give them that. This is a very aggressive, very sloppy ex parte motion. They convinced a judge to freeze your accounts by claiming you committed corporate espionage and that the money in your Seattle bank accounts is the direct result of extortion. It's not, I said. The only money in those accounts is from my salary at my day job. I believe you, Cora said, taking off her glasses. But the court doesn't know that yet. And honestly, the frozen bank accounts aren't your biggest problem. She pulled a secondary document from the pile I'd handed her, a notice that had been attached to the back of the bank freeze. I hadn't even read that far down. They didn't just freeze your cash, Cora explained, tapping the paper with a silver pen. They filed a lien against the blind trust itself. Adele is claiming that Theodore used misappropriated company funds to develop the routing algorithm years ago. She's arguing that because company money funded the research, the patent belongs to Drent Logistics, regardless of whose name is on the LLC. My stomach plummeted. Is that true? Did he use company money? It doesn't matter if it's true today, Cora said bluntly. It only matters if she can drag out the discovery process long enough to make you bleed. With a lien on the trust, the asset is frozen. You can't sell it. You can't transfer it. You can't even legally license it to a third party until the lien is cleared by a judge. I thought about Ren's $20,000 sitting in the hotel safe. I thought about her plan to buy the algorithm for $5 million and take over the company. So I can't sell it to anyone, I said, my voice hollow. Not legally, no. If you try to transfer ownership while this lien is active, you're committing fraud. Adele would have you arrested. Cora leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. She's boxed you in. She knows you don't have the liquidity to fight a prolonged battle over the origin of the development funds. She expects you to fold by Friday. I didn't have $50,000. I barely had 20, and it was dirty money from the sister who had just tried to trick me into a fraudulent sale. Ren knew about the lien. She was in the room when Adele's lawyers drafted the strategy. She knew I couldn't legally sell it to her, but she offered me the cash anyway, hoping I'd take it out of desperation. If I had signed a transfer agreement with her last night, I would have handed them both the exact crime they needed to put me away. I can pay the $5,000 to unfreeze my accounts, I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. Cora raised an eyebrow. Cash? Cash, fine. I can file the motion this afternoon. We might get you in front of a judge by Thursday. She started writing on a yellow legal pad. But what are you going to do about the lien, kid? You can't sit on a dead asset forever. Drent Logistics is currently paralyzed, but Adele will find a workaround eventually. She'll hire a new tech firm to build a patch, or she'll bleed her reserves to manually route the fleet. Once she stabilizes the company, she'll crush you. I know, I said. I left Cora's office and walked back out into the bitter Chicago wind. The city felt huge and indifferent. I had thought walking into that gala and dropping the paper in the wine was the end of the war. I was stupid. It was just the opening shot, and I had severely underestimated the people I was fighting. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from an unknown number. Meet me at the diner on 4th and Elm, 1 p.m. Don't tell your sister. I stared at the screen. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew the diner. It was the same dingy, 24-hour place where Theodore had given me the manila folder. I typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came 3 seconds later. "Holt Wyndham. Your mother fired me this morning." I shoved the phone into my coat pocket and pulled my collar up against the biting wind coming off the lake. 4th and Elm was a 20-minute walk from Cora's office, and I spent every block weighing my options. I had $0 to my name, a sister trying to trick me into a felony, and a mother who was actively trying to ruin my life. Meeting the guy who had spent the last 5 years cooking the books for my mother seemed like a terrible idea, which meant it was the only option I had left. The diner smelled like stale grease and industrial floor cleaner. It was a narrow, cramped place tucked between a dry cleaner and a boarded-up storefront. I spotted Holt immediately. He was sitting in a corner booth in the back, staring at a thick ceramic mug of black coffee like it had personally insulted him. He didn't look like the polished, untouchable executive I'd seen near the coat check 12 hours ago. His tie was gone, his expensive shirt was wrinkled, and he had the gray, sunken look of a man who hadn't slept and had just watched his entire net worth evaporate. I slid into the cracked red vinyl booth across from him. He didn't offer to shake my hand. "She didn't just fire me," Holt said, his voice flat and hoarse. "She had building security escort me out of the executive suite at 6 this morning. She claimed the system failure was a direct result of my gross negligence in auditing our IT vendor contracts." "Was it?" I asked. "No, it was a direct result of her uncle outsmarting her, and you pulling the pin on the grenade." Holt finally looked up at me. His eyes were bloodshot, but she needed a scapegoat for the emergency board meeting at 9. I was convenient. She told the board I authorized the licensing agreement without proper due diligence. She legally threw me under the bus to save her own skin. A waitress walked by and topped off Holt's mug without asking. I shook my head when she pointed the pot at me. "I don't have any money to pay you for whatever information you think you have," I told him, keeping my hands folded on the table. Adele froze my accounts. I know she did. I was in the room when she ordered Sullivan Cahill to file the injunction. I know about the lien on the trust, too. Holt took a slow sip of the boiling coffee and winced. Adele's strategy is simple. She's starving you out while she secures a private equity bailout. She's been on the phone since 2:00 a.m. She's trying to dilute the stock, take an injection of fast cash, pay off the Teamsters to stop the strike, and hire a brute force tech firm to build a new routing system from scratch. She can't do that by Friday, I said. "She doesn't have to," Holt replied, leaning forward. "She just has to convince the PE firm confirm that the problem is temporary. She's showing them the books right now, but she's showing them the clean books. The ones that say our drivers are perfectly legal independent contractors, that our warehouse leases are secure, and that our liability is zero. I looked at him. And you have the real books. Holt gave a bleak, humorless smile. I was the chief financial officer, kid. I built the real books. I know exactly how many millions in wage theft are hiding in the operational budget. I know about the shell companies Adele used to fund Wren's automated warehouses in Phoenix. If those books see the light of day, the PE firm walks, the SEC steps in, and Adele goes to federal prison. So give them to the SEC, I said. Why are you talking to me? Because I signed those documents, Holt said, his voice dropping to an angry whisper. If the company goes down in a federal investigation, I go down with it. Adele made sure my signature was on every bridge loan and every creative tax filing. If she gets the bailout, she buries me in civil litigation for negligence. If she doesn't get the bailout and the company collapses, I face criminal charges. He ran a hand over his face, looking suddenly much older than his mid-40s. I need Adele gone, and I need a golden parachute before the plane hits the ground, Holt said. And you're the only one holding a weapon big enough to force a hostile takeover by the board. I can't sell the patent to the board, I reminded him. You just said you know about the lien. Adele is claiming Theodore used company funds to develop the algorithm. As long as that lien is active, I can't transfer ownership. Adele is lying, Holt said bluntly. Theodore didn't use a dime of company money. How do you know? Because I was the one who hid the money for him. I stopped breathing for a second. The diner around us seemed to mute itself. The rattling of the dishes behind the counter, the low hum of the refrigerated pie case, it all faded into the background. Theodore came to me 4 years ago, Holt explained, keeping his voice steady. He knew Adele was running the company into the ground, and he knew she was taking credit for his initial architecture. He wanted to fund a modernized version of the algorithm, but he knew if he ran it through Drent Logistics, Adele would absorb it. So he asked me to help him cleanly and legally untangle his personal assets from the corporate structure. Holt reached into his leather briefcase sitting on the bench next to him. He pulled out a slim, blue flash drive and placed it on the table right next to the salt shaker. This is the complete, unredacted paper trail, Holt said. Bank transfers, private contractor invoices, independent server hosting receipts. Every single cent used to develop that algorithm came from Theodore's private, post-tax personal wealth. The lien Adele filed is entirely fraudulent, and this drive proves it. A judge will toss her injunction out of court the second they see this. I stared at the blue plastic drive. It was the key to my handcuffs. With this, Cora could break the lien, unfreeze my accounts, and give me total control over the trust again. What's your price, Holt? You take this drive to your lawyer. You break the lien. And then you go to the board of directors, Holt said, his eyes locking onto mine. You tell them you'll sell them the algorithm and drop the revocation, but only if they immediately vote to remove Adele as CEO. And as a non-negotiable condition of the sale, they have to reinstate me, grant me full corporate indemnification from any past financial irregularities, and then process my immediate resignation with a full, unassailable severance package. He was using me to launder his own exit. He wanted immunity and a multi-million-dollar payout, and he was using Theodore's algorithm as the bargaining chip to extort the board. You're just as bad as she is, I said. I'm worse, Holt agreed without a shred of hesitation. But I'm the only one sitting here handing you the key to your own cage. Do we have a deal? I looked at the drive. I didn't care about the board. I didn't care if Holt got a golden parachute or not. I cared about fulfilling the one promise I made to Theodore, letting Adele hang herself with her own arrogance. If breaking the lien allowed me to corner her, I would make the deal with the devil. I need to pay my lawyer to file the motion to break the lien, I said, and my bank accounts are at zero. Unless there's cash on that flash drive, I can't do anything today. Holt grimaced. I'm locked out of the corporate accounts, and my personal assets are heavily tied up in company stock that's currently cratering. I don't have the liquid cash for a retainer right now either. I thought about the thick white envelope sitting on the mattress in my hotel room. $20,000 in untraceable hundreds. Wren's dirty money, offered as a bribe to betray the trust. Using it felt like swallowing glass, but it was the only immediate capital I had access to. I could use Wren's money to pay Cora to use Holt's evidence to destroy Adele. There was a sick, poetic justice to it. I can get the cash for the lawyer, I told Holt. I reached out and slid the blue flash drive off the table, dropping it into my coat pocket. I'll call you when the motion is filed. I didn't wait for him to reply. I stood up, walked out of the diner, and headed straight for the L train. The ride back to the hotel felt agonizingly slow. The train rattled and swayed, the gray Chicago skyline sliding past the scratched windows. I kept my hand in my pocket, my fingers curled tightly around the plastic drive. The pieces were finally falling into place. I had the proof. I had the lawyer. I just needed to grab the cash, drop it on Cora's desk, and watch Adele's empire crumble. I pushed through the revolving doors of the hotel lobby. It was quieter now than it had been last night. The frantic executives were gone, replaced by regular tourists and bellhops pushing brass luggage carts. I walked past the front desk, keeping my head down, and took the elevator up to the 14th floor. I walked down the long, carpeted hallway to my room. I pulled my key card out of my wallet, pressed it against the black sensor pad on the door, and waited for the familiar green light and the heavy click of the lock disengaging. The sensor beeped twice. A solid red light flashed. I frowned. I wiped the card on my coat, thinking the magnetic strip was dirty, and pressed it against the pad again. 2 beeps. Solid red light. I tried the door handle. It was locked tight. A cold spike of adrenaline hit my stomach. I stepped back, looking at the room number to make sure I was in the right place. 1412. It was my room. I turned around, took the elevator back down to the lobby, and walked straight to the front desk. A young guy in a sharp vest looked up from his monitor and gave me a practiced, polite smile. Hi, my keycard isn't isn't working for room 1412, I said, sliding the plastic card across the marble counter. He took it, tapped a few keys on his keyboard, and looked at the screen. His polite smile faltered, replaced by a look of awkward customer service sympathy. I apologize for the inconvenience, ma'am. It looks like the credit card we have on file for your incidentals and room hold was declined about an hour ago. Our automated system placed a temporary security lock on the door. I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. Declined? Yes, ma'am. We attempted to authorize the standard daily hold, and the bank kicked it back. We just need you to provide a new form of payment to settle the balance, and I can recut your key right now. My accounts were frozen. The zero balance wasn't just a number on an app. It was actively shutting down my life in real time. I didn't have another credit card. I didn't have a debit card that would work. All my belongings are in that room, I said, my voice rising slightly, tight with panic. My clothes, my laptop. I just need to get in to get my things. I completely understand, and I'm very sorry, the clerk said, his voice dropping into that soothing, immovable tone reserved for difficult guests. But hotel policy dictates that we cannot grant access to a secured room until a valid payment method is established for the current balance. If you have another card, or if you'd like to pay the balance in cash, I can override the lock immediately. I have cash, I said desperately. I have cash inside the room. Just let me in for 2 minutes, and I will bring the cash right down to you. The clerk shook his head slowly, looking genuinely apologetic. I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't do that. The system won't let me authorize a key without payment upfront. It's a liability issue. I stood there in the middle of the opulent lobby, the blue flash drive heavy in my pocket. $20,000 was sitting exactly 14 floors above my head, tucked into a white envelope on a mattress. It was enough to pay my lawyer, break the lien, and end the war. And it was locked behind a solid oak door that I couldn't open because Adele had frozen the $32 in my checking account. I walked away from the marble counter and found a quiet alcove near the lobby bar, sinking into a velvet chair that cost more than my monthly rent. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I had one card left to play to get through that oak door, and it was the one person in Chicago who thought she had me on a leash. I dialed Ren's number. It rang twice before she picked up, the background noise full of shuffling papers and hushed, frantic voices. What? She answered, her tone sharp and impatient. I need you to come down to the lobby and put a credit card on file for room 1412. I told her, keeping my voice perfectly level. Adele froze my accounts. The hotel's automated system locked me out when the daily hold bounced. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The frantic voices faded as Ren clearly walked into a hallway. The envelope is still inside, she said, stating it as a fact, not a question. It's on the mattress. I can't get to it, which means I can't hire the lawyer, which means I can't do anything you want me to do. I heard a slow, measured exhale. It was the sound of someone who thought they had just won the lottery. I'll be down in 3 minutes. She didn't take the elevator. She must have taken the stairs from the mezzanine because she appeared in the lobby almost immediately, slightly out of breath but practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. She didn't say a word to me. She just walked past me to the front desk, slapped a heavy metal Amex onto the marble counter, and told the clerk to clear the balance and authorize incidentals for room 1412. The clerk tapped his keyboard, swiped the card, and handed me a freshly coded key. Ren turned to me, lowering her voice so the clerk couldn't hear. You go upstairs, you get the cash, and you go straight to a defense attorney. When the retainer is paid, you text, my lawyers have the transfer documents ready to sign. Okay, I said. I took the elevator up to the 14th floor alone. I swiped the new key card. The light flashed green, and the deadbolt clicked open. I walked in, grabbed the thick white envelope off the bed, shoved it into the bottom of my tote bag, and grabbed my laptop. I didn't pack my clothes. I didn't care about the emerald dress or the heels. I walked back out, rode the elevator down to the basement parking garage to avoid the lobby, and caught a cab on the street. 20 minutes later, I was back in Cora Fairfax's overheated office. She looked up from her legal pad as I walked in. I unzipped my tote bag, pulled out the envelope, and dropped it onto her desk. The flap fell open, exposing the tight stacks of $100 bills. Cora stared at the money, then looked up at me, her wire-rimmed glasses slipping slightly down her nose. Tell me you didn't rob a bank. It's a gift from my sister, I said. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the blue flash drive, and set it on top of the cash. And this is a gift from the former CFO of Drent Logistics. It contains the unredacted financial records proving Theodore funded the algorithm entirely, with his own post-tax personal wealth. Adele's lien is a fabrication. Cora didn't ask questions. She just picked up the flash drive, plugged it into her clunky desktop tower, and started clicking through the folders. I sat in the hard wooden chair across from her and watched her face. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the room was the hum of her space heater and the rapid clicking of her mouse. Finally, Cora leaned back in her chair and let out a low whistle. The old man kept receipts, bank transfers, independent contractor tax forms, private server invoices. It's all here, and it perfectly matches the dates on the patent filing. She pulled the flash drive out and dropped it into her desk drawer. She reached for the envelope of cash and pulled out a single stack of hundreds. $5,000 for the retainer, Cora said, tossing the rest of the envelope back across the desk to me. I'm filing an emergency motion to vacate the lien and lift the injunction on your accounts. With this evidence, a judge will sign it by tomorrow afternoon. Adele committed perjury on her original filing. Her lawyers are going to drop this like a radioactive brick the second they see my motion. When it's lifted, I want to arrange a meeting, I said. With Adele? With the board of directors. Thursday morning. Cora smiled. It was a terrifying, deeply professional smile. I'll draft the terms. By 3 p.m. on Wednesday, my bank app refreshed, showing my normal balance. The freeze was gone. The lien was dead. At 9 a.m. on Thursday, Cora and I walked into into the glass-walled executive boardroom on the top floor of the Drent Logistics headquarters. Holt Wyndham had given me the schedule before he was escorted out the day before. The room was packed. 10 board members, 3 lawyers, and a representative from the private equity firm Adele was begging for a bailout. Adele was standing at the head of the long mahogany table, mid-sentence, pointing to a slide on a projection screen. Wren was sitting to her right, looking tense but ready to ascend the throne. Adele stopped talking the second she saw me. The color drained out of her face, leaving her looking hollow and old. "Security," Adele snapped, her voice cracking. "Get her out of here." Nobody moved. Cora walked right past Adele, dropping a stack of freshly stapled court orders onto the center of the table. "I am Cora Fairfax, representing the sole owner of the routing algorithm this company relies on," Cora announced to the room. "The court order you are looking at confirms that the lien filed by your CEO has been vacated with prejudice due to fraudulent evidence. My client owns the patent, free and clear, and the licensing agreement remains permanently revoked." The boardroom erupted. The private equity representative immediately stood up and started shoving papers into his briefcase. The chairman of the board, an older man with a severe comb-over, slammed his hand on the table to quiet the room. He looked past Adele and stared directly at me. "What do you want?" the chairman asked. I stepped up to the edge of the table. I didn't look at Adele. I didn't look at Wren. I looked at the people who actually controlled the money. "I will grant Drent Logistics a perpetual exclusive license to the algorithm," I said, my voice steady and clear in the quiet room. "The price is $15 million, paid directly into my trust within 48 hours. The chairman didn't blink. "We can manage that if the fleet gets moving today." "That's just the financial term," I continued. "The structural terms are non-negotiable. First, Adele Calloway is removed as CEO, effective this exact second, and stripped of her board seat. She will have no further association with this company." Adele let out a noise that sounded like a dying animal. "You can't do this. I built this company. Theodore built it," I corrected her, finally turning to look her in the eye. "You just spent 15 years bleeding it. Now you're done." I turned back to the chairman. "Second term. The board will appoint an external, independent CEO. Nobody currently in the C-suite, and absolutely no family members." Wren shot out of her chair, knocking it backward onto the carpet. Her face was flushed dark red with fury. "Wait, no. We had a deal. You took my money." "I took a hotel room key, Wren," I said calmly. "I never signed a thing. Mom told me to sign the bridge loans for the Phoenix warehouses." Wren screamed, losing all pretense of corporate composure. "If I don't have the CEO salary and the executive indemnity, I am personally liable for $40 million in debt. The banks will take my house. Then you should probably call a real estate agent," I said. I looked at the chairman. "The final term is the immediate reinstatement of Holt Wyndham, full indemnification for his tenure, and his immediate resignation with his standard executive severance package." The board members looked at each other. They didn't care about Adele's pride or Wren's personal debt. They cared about the stock price, the fleet, and the algorithm. Without my code, the company was dead by Friday. With it, they survived. The chairman picked up a pen. "Agreed." Adele lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the table. "I won't let you," she shrieked, all her polished book club elegance entirely gone. "I am your mother. I took you in when you were nothing. You took me in to look good," I said, my voice dropping so low the room had to strain to hear me. "And then you left me out of the pictures. I spent my whole life taking notes on exactly how you operate, Adele. I just finally put them to use." I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't wait for the security guards to come escort her and Wren out of the building they used to own. I turned around and walked out the glass doors with Cora right behind me. We took the elevator down in silence. When we hit the lobby, I handed Cora the rest of Wren's $20,000 in cash as a bonus. She didn't argue. She just tipped an invisible hat to me and walked out into the busy Chicago street. I ordered a car to O'Hare. I sat in the back of the town car, watching the city skyline shrink in the rearview mirror. My phone buzzed with an alert from my banking app. It wasn't the $15 million yet. That would take a day to clear the wire process. It was just a notification that my direct deposit from my analytics job in Seattle had hit my account. I turned my phone on silent, leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, and closed my eyes. The war was over. The strings were cut. I was finally, completely invisible to them.